Okay.
So welcome all. I am the facilitator, that's the word, facilitator for today's clean weekly call, January 4th, 2022. Wow, I've gotten like 2022 right, like the beginning of the year. That's just the new thing for me. So I'm over with Noah in the Climate Program Office, and I'm happy to be with you all today. Again, we are recording this for those who can't make this time. Like Lynn, you were just saying before we started recording that not everybody can make this time. So, we do know that people listen to these recordings. So when you are speaking, today is an informal call. We don't have any specific topics. Just, introduce yourself. We're a small group so far. We may grow as time goes on. Again, it's an informal call. So I know, Lynn, you wanted to introduce Carrie or Kari?
Carrie.
Carrie, all right. I used to be a classroom teacher, and students used to mess with me all the time with all the pronunciations and spelling variations of the names. And so, Carrie. Why don't we do that first, and then maybe we'll just do quick introductions, especially for Carrie in the chat, and then we'll segue to announcements. So Lynn, why don't you just introduce Carrie?
So thank you, Frank. So at NCSE, the teacher support program has quadrupled since I got to be online last. I now have an assistant director, a curriculum specialist, a program coordinator, and we're bringing in one more person in April. So my team is no longer just me trying to do all of the plates in the air at the same time. So it's super exciting. And one of the most important pieces to me is that I now have a person helping me with our curriculum that we plan to have all the pieces finally in line by March 1st, thanks to the addition of Carrie. So Carrie was a classroom teacher for many years out of both DC and Chicago, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about her background. But you know how NCSE prides ourselves, and we're driven by teachers, for teachers, with teachers. And so I wanted to recruit in a teacher who was a curriculum specialist. So Carrie, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I got my background is in secondary education. I thought I was going to be a biology teacher, but then I was placed in a middle school classroom. So for my first few years of teaching, I taught for Chicago Public Schools, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade all at the same time. So it was quite the trial by fire, especially when it came to teaching about earth sciences and space science, because my background was very limited in that. And that's the majority of the 6th grade curriculum for Chicago Public Schools. But I loved it so much and found it so wonderful that when I transitioned to DC Public Schools, I continued teaching 6th grade science there. I taught for Alice Steele Middle School, which is one of the largest middle schools I've ever taught for, 1,500 students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I taught a cohort of 100. And because the school was so large, we did all of the same lessons in a cohort of teachers. So there were 5 6th grade science teachers, and we traded responsibilities, writing the curriculum, making sure the lessons were in line. So eventually I got the task of writing for the entire year for our teacher set. And I loved it, and was able to write a lot of really wonderful lessons that I'm really glad I get to share now with Lynn and continue to develop that expertise.
Oh, and I should mention she's a climate specialist, so her specialty is climate education and earth science. So that's why we wanted her so badly.
And I've had some opportunities to actually work with a little bit of climate justice with Schools for Climate Change as well, taking students to Capitol Hill and talking to lawmakers there. We were very lucky and be able to have some one-on-one conversations with some of the representatives. And it was really wonderful to hear some of their ideas for climate, addressing climate change and mitigating the effects of it.
Carrie, I think you're going to find great fellowship in this community. You've got some of the leaders of exactly what you're talking about joining you. So, don't hesitate to reach out. You'll find the listserv to be a very effective tool where you just reach out and you'll find usually a very awesome and multitude of responses that will lead to great collaborations. And the one thing that is very true about the climate education, climate literacy, climate empowerment, however you want to bound it, community is hyper collaborative. So, you know, that's, it's true. So keep it going. Lynn, given what you've done here, it might be valuable for the community, since we are recorded and it's an informal conversation, just to describe the NCSE climate work a little bit more, just to put some more context into your introduction to Carrie.
Okay, so as you guys know, at the National Center for Science Education, we have been an advocate for evolution teaching for 40 years. We're actually celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and I wish we were doing way more hype, but Anne wants to hold off for 50. She's like, no, 50 is the big one. So we're going to just do like a little mini hype for the 40th. But about 10 to 12 years ago now, we decided that there was another need beyond just evolution. And it has obviously been extremely important over these past few years that climate change is just the treatment they're getting in classrooms is not up to par. And so we added climate change to our banner of science education advocacy to make sure that sound science is in the classroom. And then they hired me on in 2019. I started in 2019, but I officially came on staff on 2020, which was crazy because that was the year of the pandemic. And I had just stepped out of the classroom right before all hell broke loose. And so they brought me in to start developing curriculum specifically targeting misconceptions in climate change, misconceptions in evolution, and misconceptions in the process and nature of science. And we have been working for 2 full years on nothing but curriculum in my area. And we have 15 lessons going live on March 1st. So we're extremely excited about this. We had the 5 original lessons that Brad Hogue developed. We've taken them and turned them into NGSS storylines. So everything is done with NGSS 3-dimension storylining, etc. So yeah, so we're super excited to have Carrie join us because it has made my burden a lot less because I was trying to handle all of these storylines with multiple pieces on my own, and having a second voice is, you know, how valuable it is to have someone to work with. So our mission going forward is to continue making sure that if there's something happening legislatively that's affecting science education, that we will still safeguard that with Glenn Branch backing us always. But Carrie and I are going to really be working to have NCSE come onto the stage as a major curriculum developer.
So Lynn, would you like to schedule a time in the clean weekly calls, like say March 8th?
Oh yeah,
the new curriculum?
Yeah, because it will be ready. And I'd actually let Carrie take lead because her specialty is the climate lessons. I would definitely help her assist. But yeah, I think Carrie should take lead on that.
So Gina, I see you're already popping in the spreadsheet. So that's awesome. Yep, yeah, that's you.
I'll add it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. No, that's I'm glad. Thanks for indulging us for a moment just to take care of a little business before we get into informal conversation. So any announcements for the community that besides the Lynn, you just made one about March 1st. So that's super exciting. And I was an advisor and a partner on that, the work that Brad did back in the day. So yep. I'm super excited to see where that goes. And
we kept all of his lessons intact. We just built around them.
Sure.
So,
you know, all the refinements to make it more implementable is awesome. So Gina, I see you got your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I heard from Anna this morning that for those of you that don't know, we're doing a network analysis for Clean to try to improve and better understand how the network works. And so I just heard from Anna this morning that we got IRB approval for for the survey. So we will be sharing that survey soon. And we really hope that everyone in the network will take a few minutes to fill it out and encourage others to fill it out so that we can, again, better understand how everyone interacts and try to improve and see yeah, see what we can do better. So keep an eye out for that, and please take some time to fill it out.
Gina,
and share
is
it
that
with
going to be sent to just the Clean Network members or more broadly?
just the Clean Network members, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, but I think it's just the Clean Network members.
Right now, it's just the Clean Network. You know, Tamara, I would assume from what your question that we also, one of the things we have to do is grow the network. But we need to understand the network a little bit more. And so that's really the point of the analysis.
So the first survey we did in 2013 was just to Clean Network members. The second one we did was in 2015, and that was more broadly. But as you can imagine, there's issues with that because you don't get, it's hard to get a representative sample who's not in the network.
Sure, exactly. So that's the first thing. I've seen some of the scrubbing of, like, we've never known in the Clean Network when we're talking about 700, 800 people who are professionals in climate and energy literacy in the United States and beyond. We never knew who they were, you know, and so now we have a good understanding of who's in the network, which is stunning and really, really impactful. So, but now we're deepening that with the relationships in the network. So it's a really important thing. So if those who are listening, who are not actually who I'm speaking to, please promote it, do it, and it'll help us all get much more connected. We have better tools we need to develop to be more effective as a network. The listserv is amazing. These calls are amazing, but you know, there's more that we could do to really optimize the network to do the shared work. So thank you, Gina. Jim, you have an announcement?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Frank. So I'm not sure how many others in the Clean Network. I hope several others have applied. Today is the deadline for the submitting to be a case study for the monitoring and evaluating climate communication and education, the Mises project, which is out of Canada. They have several $1 million to highlight what they say is innovative and exemplary programs around the world. So it'll be the programs around the world working together and looking for case studies, and it's specifically meant to study programs and to influence policymakers and education programs of what tends to work. So our presentation is in California, Mobile Climate Science Labs in Washington, D.C., and then several schools in Washington, D.C., of course, Lowell and Montgomery County, which is a county that is size, as Frank well knows, is bigger than 6 U.S. states. It's well over 1 million people. And so they're very much in it. By the way, off of AGU, a nice thing, we had a meeting with the students at Lowell off of their AGU poster, and the head of the school came in, and a sign of Lowell really getting behind what we're doing. The head of school asked us, if you had unlimited amounts of money, students, what would you do with it? And kind of going, why is the California, we call him the principal, why is the head of school saying that? But it was a great interaction of things going on. In any case, just to check in, and of course we're going to be promoting Clean through that in the Clean Network, and of course have to get to know Carrie. I've known NCSC for quite some time, but if you're in DC, Carrie, if we can do anything to assist what you're doing, that's what we're all about. So thanks. And by the way, there's also a Youth Climate Summit by Montgomery County for the public schools. That's in March, and there's the Energy Summit in April, which we're also a part of. That's more dealing with professionals about, like you see behind me, making the U.S. Capitol more energy efficient. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Can you put a link to the case study request for Mies in the chat? Because I would think, you know,
absolutely.
Yeah, I would think the Clean Network should definitely be something that they look at. I'm an advisor on that project, and I'm just, you know, too many things going on to track it all, but I hadn't been tracking that item. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, we'll do. And of course, I want others to get in and do the whole Clean Network. But one of our things is making sure they know the Clean Network is very much a part of it. You know, you're going to be dealing with the Clean Network if you're going to be dealing with us, because we're going to be encouraging everybody in. So
thank you, Jim. Any other announcements? Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that. Anything? All right. We can always come back, you know, if you got to like, oh, great. We can always come back to it. So we have an informal conversation. I am going to have to leave a little early, so I'm going to hand the reins back over to Gina or anyone else. You guys can all just self take care of it, because I got to take my son for his first college interview. So that's got to happen. Get out.
That's awesome.
It is.
What's he wanting to specialize in? Is he following Dad's footsteps or going on his own journey?
He's going on his own journey that is still emerging.
Okay.
He was the one that he wanted to get into sustainability, but and actually the doing of it, not the study of it. And you know, but I'll tell you, there are no programs out there. Because you're dealing with much more like program management,
Right,
and construction. And those programs, just, you know, the real practical doing of, you know, these things, it's just not out there. And we've looked, and you would think the closest I found was a sustainability minor in Maryland, but that's not, you know, it's just weird. Like higher education programs are very 20th century. You know, the work before us for the next, you know, couple decades of massive transformation in energy, transportation, food, land use, building, all that. It just doesn't seem like it's showing up in higher education institutions, because I'm doing it as a parent, but I'm also somebody who knows where things are going, and we are not preparing our students for this moment.
that's interesting. I thought that those programs were growing rapidly.
Yes, you right. Me too. Right, and I've done the GCSE deans for sustainability studies and looked at all that. But when you actually get into, like, as a parent, and you're like, wow, where's my kid got to go? They got to go 5 states away that are not state schools, that are super expensive. Arizona State University has got some amazing programs, but that's in, you know, Arizona. You know what I mean? It should be much more prevalent. Even though it's growing, it's starting from such a low number that its preponderance is incredibly low. So, you know, it's just, I'm seeing it from the other side, and I'm seeing we have a lot of work to do. You know, we could get into that. That's a thing that our community needs to focus on, is the higher education part of the equation. Because if we do everything we do is amazing in the, you know, middle school, high school, elementary, and then they hit college, and it's like, what? Come on, there's a breakdown in the system. So that's what I'm seeing as a parent. So anyway, but that's
Well, that's
that's the
exciting.
topic.
Yeah, well, it is a good topic. It is tied to, you know, our future needs, but I'm wondering, are they majoring in ecology and then focusing on sustainability as their, like, master's and PhD research? So I wonder if that's what's happening.
Well, but the other side of it is that, you know, one other major school is the business school. And Tamara, I know you teach some climate in a business school context, if I remember correctly. But
Yes, I teach global climate change at Bentley University as a business school.
right, there you go. Right. So, but the teaching climate change in a business school, but then actually teaching the doing of sustainability in the business context. I don't know if that also happens there, Tamara.
And our courses in sustainability also, in addition to my course. So my course is focused really on the science of climate change, with then trying to show the applications to businesses and things. But that may actually have to evolve. Students really are looking for things that are relevant to them. And so how do you balance the interest in getting them to understand the science with their interest in paying attention to what you're trying to teach them? One skill that I really would encourage everybody to make sure you integrate into whatever curriculum you're developing is students' ability to understand data presented on graphs and maps is dismal.
Oh, yeah.
And I can just tell you, and so actually I'm right now working with the Blue Hill Observatory and Science Center to develop their new exhibit space. And one of the cross-cutting themes on the digital media that we're going to have is effective use of data on maps and graphs. Even in that short context of a museum, having people actually integrate effectively, and it's a huge challenge because they make assumptions. If you have colors on the map, they make assumptions without ever looking at the key, and they could have really interesting. They can make really interesting and wrong analysis just because of those kinds of assumptions. So I just encourage people to think about that.
Eric, I see your hand is up. Did you were you going somewhere new?
No, definitely connected
All
to
right, go for it.
Tamara, Carrie, and Lynn were sharing. So I think we're all have been involved in various aspects of climate curriculum development, delivery. I know Frank's working on a piece. I'm sure at UCAR, there's a ton, Emily, that you all are doing. And we've had a lot of good conversation over the last year about where the gaps are. So kind of, Tamara, what you were mentioning about data and understanding how to interpret it. I remember from past webinars, we talked a little bit about like higher education and integration across all, like Frank, you were saying, across like all schools, colleges. Like a place like Berkeley has a multitude of actual small colleges that represent the whole university. And then at the K-5 environment, it's on the other side. It's like, what do you teach them that gets them prepared to sort of be more integrative in their thinking? I mean, there are self-contained classrooms, so they can kind of, in some ways, teachers have the opportunity more easily to sort of push it out across the whole curriculum if they're so inclined. But the question is, what's the right type of information? Because when we did work at Chabot, we found it's really about integration with other core topics that, say, for example, if the district's adopted something like the FOSS curriculum out of the hall, or, is really trying to be mindful of NGSS and the articulation of curriculum across the K-12 environment. What do you teach them? So I just be curious from the team, other gaps that Tamara, you identified, and Lynn and Carrie, if you have sort of specific strategies, or if that's kind of, as you're onboarding new folks, if that's kind of part of the puzzle, is to figure out where the gaps are. And if you have any now, and for the rest of the team too, like Frank, for your project, why we're choosing to do what we're doing and where we need more resource.
Well, and one thing we're doing with our curriculum is that we're doing a field study. It's a 2-year field study. And we started piloting the lessons this past year to see how the climate change lessons are really where kids are struggling the most. And we're getting that feedback. What's interesting is that so many of the teachers teach climate change second semester, so we have no data yet. First semester, all of them were doing our nature science lessons for the most part. And they're all getting ready to start doing the climate series in the spring or right now. So some of them are coming back from break and going to move into climate change, and some of them are going to wait till spring and start the climate change unit. And so we'll have data next year to share with you guys on what we've learned about where the biggest areas are. We just don't have it yet. But that is on our list of like trying to figure out, are we targeting the important things we need to be targeting? And if not, what should we be adding?
Frank, did you want to go next? You're muted.
Okay, so I wanted to birdwalk back to a couple of things. One of which Tamara was mentioning. Another thing that you were talking about, Frank. Tamara, one of the things I'm wondering about with the question of being able to of students being able to handle graphs. Have you looked at that in terms of how they're? I'm assuming you're meaning static graphs, something printed on a piece of paper or splashed up on a screen.
For the most part, yet, although I've had them work with interactive graphs also.
That was what I was really wondering about, because I have my students work a lot with interactive graphs. And
I'm kind of wondering if having them actually create the graphs themselves would help them to, but I've done that. I've done that in the past, in which then the students actually label the axes wrong. They'll have 2 variables on the graph and 2 axes, and they'll label the axes wrong. then when you ask them then to read the graph, then they realize the mistake.
You know, what'd be an interesting little thing to do is not only have them make the graphs, but figure out how to manipulate the graphs to communicate certain things. Because there's
Yeah.
always that bit about, okay, we'll make it look really monstrous incline by, we're going to set our, rather than set it at 0, we're going to set it at the bottom of our data set.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
It's geez, I'm trying to remember the name. There's I won't. You can. It's the issue of when people are presented graphs in the media.
Mhm.
You can end up telling a very different story depending on where you set the axis.
Yes.
And it would be kind of fun to do that with a group of students saying, okay, we want to communicate this. Well, how are you going to set the axis? How are you going to configure your data? What's going to be your data range?
Mm-hmm.
And which gets into a whole question of climate miscommunication.
Right.
Well, the other thing, Frank, is when you were talking about schools and finding really having a hard time finding schools that actually had sustainability on a practical level built into their curriculum. One of the things I wonder about with that, because I see this operational at PSU that makes a big thing about being a school that really emphasizes sustainability, not only in their operations, but in their curriculum,
Right.
but it maintains the same discipline silos. And so it's kind of a case of what's woven into the program rather than is there a program?
Well, there's a lot, there's so much more there. I just heard the door close, so that means we're getting ready to head out. But I'm going to leave you with one example. Climate graphs are like complex to a whole nother level, right? They are some of the hardest graphics to interpret properly. And I remember a project many years ago where they used iTest. God, it was a long, man, where did that come from? But what they did was they took IPCC graphs and then they used iTest, where you can track where eyeballs are looking. And basically people were always looking in the wrong places. They just weren't tracking what was being done. And then
we did that eye tracking in the Earth Labs project. That's how we improved our graphics.
With IPCC graphics and then redo the graphic in order for it to be more.
It wasn't IPCC graphics, but it was data on graphs that we then, what we did was we actually did the eye tracking with an expert and then eye tracking with a novice and compared how people were looking. And then we redesigned the graphics to draw the eyes of the novice to the important areas.
Right. So but that kind of sophistication has been in our community before. But these important graphics are really, really, really hard to properly interpret because they put everything in there at once. So I just give you this as a case study, like the AR6 graphics, really important graphics for humanity, but really, really challenging to properly interpret. And so, just as a case study example of why what you're talking about as a data skill, Tamara, is just so utterly and profoundly important. And when we designed climate literacy back in 2009, this piece of it really didn't jump out as strongly as it should have. So then there's the media literacy part, which is different than the data literacy, as two foundational pieces of climate literacy or energy literacy. So unfortunately, I need to get, well, maybe fortunately, but this is a super interesting conversation, but I'm going to stop facilitating. So Gina, I'm going to hand it over to you. But I hope you all have a great 2022. And Gina, over to you.
Good luck with your college visit.
Yeah, good luck to your son.
Yeah, me too.
Luck. It was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Carrie. Look forward to future meetings.
And Lynn, I see your hand is raised too.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you guys, so we were talking about graphs, and so it is an informal conversation, so it's okay to bring up new stuff too, right?
Right,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I wanted to tell you guys that we collaborated with King Center out of Canada, Edmonton, and I am so very proud of this new graphing tool we developed with them. So I wanted to show it off to you guys because it takes the IPCC data and it puts it into hindcasting. And so we start with Sawyer in 1972 and his just observations that were so very simple. And then we move forward to Brecker or Brocker, however you say his name. And then we went into Hansen, and then we do IPC assessment report 1, 2, 3, and 4. And kids are going to actually get to interact with these graphs and look at the model assumptions and the complexity, because Frank brought that up, how complex they can get. And so this tool I am so very proud of because we funded the development and we're using it in our lesson 2. So our climate modeling lesson, this whole piece was designed for that. One of our teacher ambassadors had the idea, and sort of we brought it to fruition. So I wanted to show it off.
Does this say what Sawyer's 1972 is?
It does. If you go to the Sawyer model and click on it, and you look over to the right, it'll say this model, and it'll explain
Okay.
the article and give the reference for you for every
Mhm.
piece we used.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and it's so much fun to play with. You can like move the model assumptions for, so that's 1972, and then you can change it to use modern estimates, which they can really see how even back then when we knew so little, when you change the estimates to modern, it doesn't really alter the trend enough to not be
Right.
supported. And this is
Yeah,
going
no,
to
I'm
that.
capturing all of these because I'm actually working on designing my class for the spring. And so I
Oh,
want them to
awesome.
work with lots of different tools.
Well,
Data.
when we do the presentation in March, we'll show you climate modeling, which is our lesson 2. And it's really fantastic. It takes the kids through this. It gives them interactiveness. I just cannot tell you how much I love this. We developed one other with
Jen and
them.
Harry, can you put your email addresses in the chat so I have them?
Absolutely. So, and we have one other, I'll put it in the chat too. It's called Climate Contributions. And that's where you can actually see the differences in what actually contributed to climate. And it's very impactful as well for kids. So we're trying to do all these going back to what Frank said, interactive graphs that can actually be manipulated and used.
These might be good to actually put in the Clean collection to ingest them, because we're always looking for new resources. And Carrie had her hand raised, but it looks like she's gone now.
Oh, there she is.
Maybe she was having Wi-Fi issues.
Yeah.
Carrie, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, and I'm so sorry about that. My internet flashed off for a moment
All
there.
good. No worries.
I wanted to go back to what Tamara had said about the graphing and the mapping. And I can't remember who added on that sometimes having the students make the graphs obviously helps them. But something that I found is actually teaching them how to use maps and having them color in maps is also very helpful for that, especially when it comes to creating sort of a timeline of climate change, assigning groups different maps to color in and then present what the meanings of those maps are. Makes it a little bit more engaging and helps them to better understand what the colors actually signify.
Yeah, I just have college students and I don't think they'll take too kindly to coloring. So
you'd be surprised.
For me, it's like
the trouble is finding that balance between giving them enough guidance and having it be so cookbookish that they can just do it without thinking. And that's a huge challenge with my students. I just really struggle with that because I a lot of times feel like I end up giving them more information than I would like to, just so that they can actually accomplish the task. But I'm not convinced that they're actually thinking about it.
And I think that's a testament to the kind of work that needs to be done at the elementary level, for example, right? If these activities are being done at the elementary level, then we're building them up for getting them to that college level where they already have that understanding. But like Lynn said, you would, on my experience, I never thought, 14-year-olds would enjoy sitting around and coloring, but they love it. So.
And they did the student, another thing to keep in mind is that I'll have a map that has data on it in colors and in contours, and it has the outlines of the continents underneath all of that. And the idea is the student should be able to tell what the different data is related to geographically. But I've had the students look at it and they only see the colors and they don't see the continents at all. And it's really been strange. My sense is that they don't deal with maps really. If they want to know, I actually had a map where we were looking at a weather pattern and it was over the state of Illinois. And the question asked them to identify something that the student had to do Google Illinois to figure out where it was on the map before they could then look at the map with the data because they didn't know where to look. And that's because they punch into into Google Maps where they want to find, and then they don't ever have to see the bigger context.
Yeah, and again, I think that's even more of a reason that maps should be one of the big resources that we use in science classrooms, not just for weather and climate, but also for other aspects such as erosion, deposition, et cetera, even looking at some of the life sciences.
My other argument for pushing this on the business students is that they're going to have to understand data on maps, whether it's earth science data, climate science data, or their business's economic data. I mean, they're going to have to deal with data on maps. So it's a skill that will benefit them regardless of what career they go into.
Absolutely agree.
Oh, Eric, go ahead.
I was just thinking, we've been doing a project that we shared it in one of the AGU sessions. It's called the Otaka Project, but the goal is basically to sort of pair environmental literacy with climate justice as well. So and within the city of Oakland. So it's an Oakland Unified School District project. And we're using ArcGIS, and just to kind of piggyback on what you're talking about with these tools, there's so many new tools. Like we're publishing maps on sort of a storyboard within about 5 or 10 minutes, literally using this ArcGIS sort of embedded tool that allows you to kind of essentially almost create like a mini website immediately, where you create the visualization that you're looking for. You can source data from all over the place, data sets from all over the place, like where are the schools in Oakland, which schools in Oakland have food deserts, so you kind of, the challenge is to sort of figure out the data and the story that you want to tell. But I think what I'm finding, like to your points, like if we can bring students into mapping through giving them some latitude and choice with what they map first. So the hook is, what do you want to map? You want to map your neighborhood? You want to map trees in your neighborhood? You want to map parks? How accessible are you? Can you find fresh produce in your neighborhood? So give students, you could frame it with a goal. There's a climate literacy connection, climate, maybe it's food connected, whatever it is, but especially at the elementary level, but really at any level, giving them latitude to sort of make some choice. And the other thing that's cool about maps for me is that they span disciplines. So it's not just about science, it's about visualization, which has an element of art to it. It could be about social studies and geography and people, or natural environments. So there's so many components, and it becomes kind of this storyline and the storytelling component, which I know, Frank, is part of your project ultimately, like to embed that storytelling piece. And if the students are empowered to create their own story initially, I feel like that will propel them forward in a really good way.
Now, one of the things that we're doing in one of our lessons is this Cool Cities activity, which was one of the original climate activities. And so students are creating their block and then trying to understand how the human components of their city actually create a heat zone or or actually cool. And then one of the things that we've talked about is using one of these mapping ArcGIS mapping visualizations to look at canopy cover in cities and allow students to connect canopy cover with another factor of their choice, which could be really anything, to see how canopy cover and another factor are related, tying in that kind of climate justice piece.
Go ahead, Eric. Oh, no, you're good.
Sorry, that's a legacy hand, but just
No
to,
worries.
yeah, Emily, thank you. That's the one we were using, the story maps piece. Thanks for sharing that.
Jim.
Yeah, and just tying in on the urban forest canopy is a important one on climate justice and one that resonates. It happens to be I live in Oakland and work with people and with the schools and stuff. It is a major issue of environmental racism, and what we've learned is that people are getting that all across the country now. It's seen that the discrepancy between the tree covered canopy, the amount of trees in wealthy white neighborhoods and those of Black and people of color. You might see on Trevor Noah's, Dulce has a nice video about it. That's a good start for folks on it and things. But I mean, for instance, the city of Oakland, which is known as a progressive city, part of their thing is, I mean, they just decimate the trees in the lower area. We've lost 25% of our trees in the last 5 years in the areas of people of color, and it has not gone down in the wealthy white areas. There's a law that says you must protect the trees, you know, if they have a certain size, and basically have documented that the city just pushes that law aside. And if somebody wants to develop and do things, they can just rip down the trees and follow the law, not at all, and all kinds of deals with it and so on. And finally, there's a difference between, you have certain cities where this happens, and then there's other cities like Piedmont, which is inside of Oakland, is very rich in trees. Anyway, it's tied to DC. I just wanted to amplify. It's one that students really get behind and teachers can really get behind on that being an issue where you can see how climate and systemic racism and equity really come together. So, sorry, I wasn't very articulate there.
And Jim, did you have your hand raised about something else earlier? I know you had your hand raised when I was speaking the first time and didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, Gina, you're very kind. I had, just as I just did now, I failed to take it down after I've done talking. So I talked once, I hadn't taken it down, and you're being very kind to see that everybody is heard from. No,
okay.
If anything, I worry about talking too much, so we're good.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't steamrolling you at all. All right, Tamara then.
Okay, so since we had a somewhat of a lull in the discussion, I thought I would just put this out there. I'm working with the Blue Hill Observatory and Science Center. It's a meteorological observatory in Massachusetts that has the longest continuous meteorological record in the United States. It has a continuous record since 1885. And the state is renovating the building because it's a landmark spot. And we're going to have a new exhibit space. So we're developing this this idea for this set of digital media. They'll probably be on the order of 5 monitors, and we've identified the high level content areas. And what I was so I'll tell you what those are right now, but what I'm going to ask from you is, if you were to go to a meteorological observatory, what would you expect to see in their exhibit hall? What kind of information would you expect to see? Now, I'll tell you what we've kind of identified, and then you can tell me whether there's something else you would expect or whether you wouldn't expect something. So the first item is basically the history of the Blue Hill Observatory, their climatological and meteorological measurements, and the history of measurement taking over time. Then there's one exhibit on meteorology, weather, one on climate and climate impacts, one on plants, animals, the environment, and geology, and then one on space weather and astronomy. And then the cross-cutting themes across all of those ones where so one, for example, like we've just been talking about, the effective use of data on graphs and maps. One is the next generation science standards. One is human health. One, I'm trying to remember them all. One is entrepreneurship, workforce development and jobs. One is equity and inclusion. So these are the cross-cutting themes. I think one is Earth system science. So that covers quite a range. So in terms of that high-level content area, if you were to go to a meteorological observatory, one that takes weather measurements every single day, and they actually go into the National Climatic Data Center's database, what would you expect to see there? What would you be looking to see there?
Gina, if it's okay to jump in. Sorry, Frank, if you want to. One of the things I'd say, Tamara, you have all the components. It's the, I'm a firm believer in power of place initially, as it just, so if there's, where is this located, on the Earth, and what kind of climate does it have? So taking those pieces that you mentioned and integrating them to sort of unpack the idea that, we get these climate patterns over the course of a year because of X, Y, and Z influence.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you could sort of go backwards in time and then potentially forward in time to talk about historical climates and how things have shifted a little bit. And then kind of looking at the IPCC reports and the projections. And again, if you've got that regional case study, I think that can really be powerful, because presumably most of the folks going to that museum or that space are local. So then just starting there, and if the goal is to be more globally relevant, then that's okay too, because you've still got your case study for the local environment, and you've got the sort of retroactive climate, paleoclimates or just historical climates. You've got, because I think what's resonating now is we're seeing the changes in climate happening, and folks are super concerned, and they want to know, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for my kids? How do I become more resilient? Where do I go from here? And it's, we're getting better and better with resolution. So the crystal ball of what's the future going to look like is starting to resolve, and not just be sort of, it could be this, it could be that. And as we were talking about earlier, when you look at the historical, the hindcasting that we talked about, that just further validates that these climate models are pretty strong, and they have been strong for a long time. So that's just one thought. Local case study is sort of a way to sort of hook them in to this whole concept.
Okay, great. Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, so thinking exhibits here for a minute, and being an ex-science museum person, the thing that I would envision, since the centerpiece, the historical centerpiece of this place is its data record, a really big timeline.
Okay.
A really big timeline that not only highlights the data, but also the historical context, historical events, as well as climate events. And then the timelines are always go backwards. And Eric, when you were talking about going forward, I was thinking, yeah, it'd be interesting to have a timeline that bifurcates at the end. Or splits up into multiple pathways. So
that's a really cool idea. I like that.
Yeah, that'd be fun to play with.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there might be a way of doing that effectively. So I'll have to think about that more. Thanks a lot. Emily?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, if you could let me know where I can find that database, I might play with it just on my own. Just draw some
Okay,
pictures.
I'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because it's kind of fun to do.
Emily?
Yeah, I could talk to this a little bit, but if you're on the call next week, my coworker Tiffany is going to be on the call, and she would be a great person to talk to about this.
Okay.
Because she's one of the people that do our tours in our exhibits. So she would be able to give you a sense of maybe some things that are that people are drawn to the most. But from my vantage point, we have real-time data that people really like. We've run into technical things with that. So working closely with finding a way to smoothly take real-time data and make it easy to interpret for the public is something that folks really like our wind data. So they can see all the different types of equipment that you can collect wind data, but then they can actually see the wind data coming in and the past too. So they can kind of see, oh, wow, it was really windy on this, so they really like real-time things, anything that's tangible, touchable, that makes things alive. And then always just in the back of your mind, just always thinking whatever you do, whenever you print something, it's going to be immediately old, right?
Right.
So thinking in terms of either making things digital is also comes with it. It's a whole share of other things, but having a way to a plan to add on or what we call
Right.
Band-Aids. And so that we purposely put our graphs in something that could easily be put a sticker on top, so we can update it every so often when new data comes out.
Yeah, most of this is going to be digital.
So perfect. That will make it so much easier for you.
The things that we want to have something else. The other thing that we'll have there is instruments, either ones that are exactly like the ones outside that are taking the measurements, or the ones that historically took measurements.
That's
and
great.
Timeline that Frank says that, you won't
That'll
have to
fit in nicely.
that can be a printed thing. But I appreciate your comment about things being printed, being dated immediately, because I've come across that quite a bit.
Yep.
Frank, you had another?
Yeah, sorry for popping in so quickly, but when Emily was talking, something jogged in my brain. Not only timelines, but parallel timelines, because I know, Emily, you folks have got online the timeline of climate science, and which is really quite well done. I use that a lot with my students, and I'm just thinking that would be a good sort of integration. Here's this site-specific timeline for this observatory, and here's it within the broader context of what's been happening with climate science and so on.
Where is it? What is the timeline you were talking? The timeline of climate science? Where is that?
It's a timeline of climate science.
I'll pop the link in.
Yeah,
Okay.
Emily's probably got it quicker than I do.
Okay. Okay, Carol, you had something to share?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and you've already said this, you were gonna have some physical instruments for
Mhm.
people to get their hands on. And I was thinking it's very simplistic, but you could have a weather instrument petting zoo where they can handle the different instruments, see what they're capable of measuring and how they're utilized. And even potentially if you want to do like arts and crafts. And again, this like for little kids, right? You could put out some very simple, biodegradable, reusable kinds of items and see if they can make something that they could use at home to measure wind speed, for example, or wind direction, for example, to give it that sort of take home effect as well. A souvenir.
Yeah, okay.
I know, yeah, just starting popcorn into like my old institution, Chabot Space and Science Center, they've just partnered with NASA, and they took one of these old wooden wind turbine blades, and they've got it on, it's huge, and it's in display in their one of their main exhibit halls. And then they do wind tunnel testing, iterations of designs to see what kind of energy can be produced. So giving like something that's that's a grabber, right? Visually, it could be historical, it just could be size, you know, especially for the young ones, just these big devices and big mechanical objects are fascinating. And that's the hook to get them to engage in engineering practice, you know, the design challenge. So that visually stunning things, I agree. Or like what you're saying, the petting zoo for the objects, we would create little anemometers with students at a very young age. You know, first grader put create a little propeller and blow on it, or play around with, you know, how many times it spin, you know, in a certain period of time. So there's tons
How do you keep track of how many times it spins in a certain amount of time?
You would mark one of the blades with a different color, and then you would watch for that cycle. And then you might have a timer, you know, or you might just one alligator, two alligator, one astronaut, two
I
astronaut,
see.
depending on the age, right? I mean, it's qualitative at the young age. You don't have to sort of be as didactic about it, but yeah, but I think just those big things to get them into the concept in some way.
Okay, well, this has all been great. Thanks for all these wonderful ideas. It's kind of fun to be at this kind of beginning stage, although we have a short timeline. The building's being renovated and we want to have a minimal viable product to sort of open with basically in September. And so, but we're sort of at this really early stage of what is it actually going to be at all.
Where will this be, Tamara?
The Blue Hill Observatory and Science Center is in Milton, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
So from the top of the hill, from the top of Blue Hill, you can see 360 degrees around, and you can see downtown Boston is about,
Nice.
I think 15 or 20 miles away, but you can easily see it. And so it's been there a while. One of the other things that they do is they do these picture posts. So they have these posts. It's a project out of the University of New Hampshire, in which you have a camera, you have a post in which you put a camera on at the same orientation and you take pictures at the same time every day, and you document environmental change over time. And one of the things that's been interesting in the pictures of the top of the Blue Hill is that the building was built there in 1885, but you can see that the vegetation has gotten more and more and more. There's been more and more vegetation. It was kind of like a bare rock top of the mountain, which is an ideal place to take meteorological observations. But that has changed over time. So one of the things that they've noted is the wind speeds have decreased, but it's not clear whether the wind speeds have actually decreased or because there's so much more vegetation, the friction caused by the vegetation is slowing down the wind speeds. So that's another question that's kind of out there. We sometimes partner with the White Mountain Observatory. It's a meteorological observatory in New Hampshire on the highest peak in the area. It's at 6,000 feet. The Blue Hill Observatory is at like 650 feet. So it's quite low, but it's high in the area. And so we sometimes compare, because I think that they have the record high wind speed on the East Coast, because it is at 6,000, the mountain is at 6,000 feet, higher than most of the mountains on the East Coast.
Cool. I'm glad that we were able to talk about that, because like you said, there was a little in conversation that seemed pretty productive. So thanks, Tamara, for bringing that up.
Okay, that was quite interesting. Thank you very much for all of your suggestions. I will share them with the people I'm working with.
Good. And it's recorded if you forget what we talked about.
Okay, actually, I'll have to, yeah, that's a good point.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone. And maybe we'll see you next week. And it's a good conversation. Happy 2022. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Gina. Bye.
Thanks all.